Hi, this is Shane Bryan from the Bad Boys Podcast. While the Bad Boys Podcast is on a break, I decided to launch a brand new show featuring interviews with some amazing guests that we've had, as well as new interviews that I've done on my radio show on LAFM. I've had so many interviews that I've done and so many more planned now. The show is called A Long Way to the Top, and if you'd like to hear more, then search for Long Way to the Top on the platform that you're listening to right now. Enjoy this special Bad Boys presentation of Long Way to the Top. This is Long Way to the Top, and I'm your host, Shane Bryan. In the words of the immortal AC/DC, it is harder than it looks. These interviews will give you a glimpse into the lives of the artists that we've sung along with, danced and rocked out to. Some go deep into their past and others celebrate their recent releases. But all of them show that regardless of who you are, it's always a long way to the top. Icehouse have been part of Oz rock history for over 40 years. 3 million albums sold just locally, over 9 million sold internationally, 8 top 10 albums, and over 30 top 40 singles. Icehouse are one of the few Aussie bands that have had success outside of our country. With as many as 19 members in the band during that time, one name has remained the driving force of the band. Iva Davies joins us on the show. Welcome.
Thank you very much indeed.
Not bad achievement for a lad from Wagga Wagga.
Yes, it's a long way out there. I'm been meaning to make a bit of a pilgrimage back to Wagga. Because the house that I sort of grew up in there is still there, apparently.
Oh, really? I bet it's completely changed now.
Yeah, no, it's still fibro, I think.
Now, look, you're heading to Tassie for Festivali. You've got a brand new single with Simple Minds, great track, and a tour with Simple Minds as well. Yeah,
look, this is a kind of repeat of a tour that we did in 1980 with them when we were both sort of starting out. We kind of did a student exchange program, as Jim Kerr from Simple Minds refers to it. They came out and supported us here where we'd had some initial success, but they were completely unknown, and kind of vice versa in the UK. We sort of went around the UK with them, I think ending up in Glasgow, which is where Charlie and Jim come from, and the band started in the first place.
Yeah, now you were a band called Flowers back then.
Yeah, well, at that point we'd only just recently changed our name, and that was our first international tour. We had to change the name because internationally somebody else was using the name Flowers, and the record company, the international record company, came to us and said, "Hey guys, bad news! You've got to change your name," which was at the time a real blow, obviously. But we had already released that first album called Icehouse, and so we adopted the name of the album.
Now, I heard a story that the name Icehouse actually comes from a flat that you lived in.
Yeah, the flat was one of three of a big old two-story mansion, which was the first place that I moved out of home into, and it was at the same time as being an incredibly wonderful place because it was full of musicians. I was at the time a member of and a working ABC orchestra. I was only 19 or 20. And the rest of the flats were filled with members of that orchestra. So there was, a trumpeter and a trombone player and a cellist and French horn player and a clarinet player. Well, actually, two French horn players because I shared a flat with a French horn player.
Poor neighbours.
So you can imagine what it was like in summer, all the windows open, everybody practicing at the same time. It was mad as anything. But it also had a very dark side, this place. And over the time that I was there, and I was there for a number of years, all sorts of weird and wonderful kind of spooky stuff happened. I'm not really a believer in the paranormal, but that place was definitely haunted. And the overarching thing about it was absolutely freezing cold. It was an incredibly beautiful place with big high ceilings and French windows, but luckily it had one operating fireplace, which I probably found the last supplier of coal in Sydney, and I managed to survive there just because of the coal fires. And that was going on all the way through to the early days of Flowers, and me getting home at 1 a.m, and thankfully the coal fire still going, and that was the way I survived. But it was tough work. It was a challenging environment, put it that way.
And of course, even with sort of the initial success of the album, like any musician knows that one good album doesn't really make you a success. It really takes a lot of hard work and continual hard work.
Yeah, well, that first album created a lot of international interest, and that was where we got our first international recording contract from. And that saw us going off to try and conquer the world overseas, and really that initial international tour was really the thing that kind of broke the original lineup of Flowers, because by the end it was such hard work that by the end of it we were all just heartily sick of each other, and kind of got back to Australia and split up and went off in our different directions, and that was kind of the end of that original lineup. But I had an obligation through the record contract to produce a second album, and that was really tough because the first album songs have been kind of collected over nearly 3 years. These were the first sort of attempts at writing songs, and then I got to that point with the second album where I had absolutely nothing. And worse than that, I had nothing, and I had an incredibly severe deadline to deliver the second album. And strangely enough, recounting the history now, the very, very first song that I wrote for that second album was the song Great Southern Land, which by now has this sort of very special place, I guess, in my history, but I think also in the history of music in Australia. And it's a remarkable thing for me to think about, the fact that that's what came out of that incredibly high-pressure situation.
Yeah. When you're writing a song like Great Southern Land, I mean, do you have any inkling that it would become such an iconic song that, I mean, many people think it should be our national anthem? Well, when I say many, I mean, well, I definitely do. Where did the inspiration come from, and did you realize at the time it was going to be so big?
Look, to answer your sort of first part of your question was all the way along the line, and this wasn't just for that particular situation, but going 3 albums, 4 albums, 5 albums, 6 albums into that whole kind of timeline. No thought in my head was ever about how long any of these songs were going to last, because all of the history I'd observed, I guess, of rock and roll bands over the ages, going way back to the Beatles and so on, was that none of them lasted a very long time, and it didn't occur to me really that I'd still be listening to Dark Side of the Moon, 50 years later, or Magical Mystery Tour or whatever. The thing that was in front of me was the immediate demand for another album and to deliver it to the record company in the time frame that they had dictated, and so none of my brain was involved in how long is this going to last at all. You talk about the inspiration of that particular song, Great Southern Land, and I think once again, with the benefit of hindsight, it was all about that very first tour that we did outside of Australia, and it was about being homesick, really. Yeah. For me, that was, a light bulb moment, getting that first flight across Australia, and then recognising the absolute enormity of the scale of the place where I was born, and that was the very first thought that occurred to me when I went to sleep on that plane and then woke up still over the desert 2.5 hours later. It was an incredible sort of moment. I just had no idea really as a young person about the scope and the scale of this particular continent if I can call it that. I'm not sure whether that's technically correct, but it's a damn big place, basically.
It is. And interestingly, you talk about flying across the desert and across the land. It really, the song invokes that whole landscape feel about it. And recently you performed a concert at Uluru with Uluru in the background of when you're singing that song. I mean, can it get any more iconic than that?
Well, look, it's an incredibly magical place, and it wasn't the first time. I'd been there once previously, and the thing that impressed me was when I first saw it, and while you're in that area, it's like a magnet. You just cannot help but turn around and look. It's just sort of omnipresent, really. My thoughts went back to what would it have been to be the first people to have walked over that horizon and seen that. And so that to me kind of defined how magical a place it is. So yeah, it was an incredible blast to be able to play there. It was incredible.
Yeah. Now, look, Great Southern Land is obviously holds a lot of a really important place in our heart, but it was the song "Hey Little Girl" that really gave you the big hit over in the UK, top 20, and you managed to tour with David Bowie out of it.
Well, I didn't spend a lot of time with Bowie, but one of the things he said to me I will never forget, which was kind of incredibly bleeding obvious, but I hadn't sort of thought about it in those terms, because he said to me, "You never know who will be listening," because he apparently was listening and heard "Hey Little Girl," and in fact so did Peter Gabriel. We had two offers of tours, and unfortunately they both conflicted timing-wise, and I actually had to choose between touring with Peter Gabriel and David Bowie, two of my biggest heroes, and had to turn down Peter Gabriel, which sort of was a heartbreaking decision. But the Bowie tour was amazing because of the sheer scale of it. It was the absolute pinnacle of his career. And we were playing to 45, 50, 60, 70,000 people every show. And I've got a photo in my kitchen of a shot that was taken, obviously, by one of the lighting crew, because it's obviously been taken from somewhere up in the rigging above David Bowie, looking out over him onto the hillside at Milton Keynes, where we did 3 shows in a row, and you can't see the end of the people. Basically, the people go back as far as the eye can see up a hill. I think there were 70,000 people there that day, but you really have no idea. You can't see the kind of the end of the crowd. And so, just looking at that photo thinking, oh, well, I was on that stage about an hour before that. so there you go.
Did you have the sea of people as well?
Absolutely, we did. And it's interesting to think back of some of those things, because really the whole process was kind of a step ahead of me the whole time. So I was sort of running to catch up. I didn't really have any opportunity to kind of, sit back and scratch my chin and sort of go, take it all in, as it were. It was quite a hamster wheel, and I was running the whole time.
There's a title for your next book, Running to Catch Up. Now,
exactly.
I mean, international success continued though with Man of Colours. What do you think it was with that album that gave it the success that it did? Was it a perfect storm with the touring and the previous successful album, or was it just Australia was the flavour of the month in the US?
I think it's a kind of coming together of a whole lot of threads. We worked incredibly hard on the previous album, which was an album called Measure for Measure. And when I say we worked hard on it, we kind of threw everything at it in terms of technology. It was one of the very first albums ever recorded fully digitally. So it was recorded on brand new technology, thing called the Mitsubishi 32-track, digital 32-track. It was multi-track to digitally, then mixed to to a digital format, and then went straight to CD, which was a brand new format at that time. Working with two producers, but predominantly with a fellow called David Lord, who had previously produced Peter Gabriel's fourth album. That's where I found him. An English producer, and I got on particularly well with him. And this was a new experience for me because I'd kind of fought producers almost non-stop on every project prior to that. And so when it came to do the next album, I really wanted to work with him again, and we did. And so it was a kind of a coming together. That fourth album did achieve some success in America, but it was kind of just knocking on the door, as it were. A number of songs like No Promises and Mr. Big and Cross the Border were sort of top 50 American hits, but didn't quite get there. And so the next album, we went into the studio with David Lord, and the album that came out of that situation was Man of Colours. And so it was a wonderful kind of collaborative success, because I worked with David Lord, who really brought a lot to the songs that I hadn't been able to contribute in the actual writing process, just arrangement things. I think he's a particularly brilliant musician, but also a great engineer, and really brought additional things to those songs. And as well as that, the sort of stage was set, as it were, in America. We'd been kind of knocking on the door with a previous album, and there were a couple of hits, and Crazy was the one that kind of broke through and got into the US top 20, followed by Electric Blue, which did even better. So, a lot of threads came together to achieve the success that the album did in America.
Do you think? I mean, I know it's hard for you to say because you're in the middle of it, but from an outsider's perspective, it seemed like the perfect album. Like every single song just worked within that album.
As I said, and I was working with Bob Kreshmer, our lead guitarist, and Bob was kind of a fairly passive sort of collaborator, but he was incredibly patient. So he would sit around in the studio as I was banging away on the various machines and kind of working on these songs. And so, by the time we got to Man of Colours, we'd gone through this process once before with, as I say, the fourth album, Measure for Measure, but also a ballet score as well. So we were used to kind of working together, and I was quite sort of disciplined about it. So we lived in my house in Erskineville. We'd be on deck ready to go to work at 9 o'clock in the morning. We'd work all day, and then in the evening we'd go out to dinner, and then come back and listen to what we'd, how far we'd got during the day. It was sort of a kind of a well-oiled machine by then, in a weird rock and roll sort of way.
Yeah, it definitely came across as the perfect blend of rock and pop, and I guess it was the one that was I think was I guess the soundtrack to the 80s, if you look at it from that perspective.
There's certainly a lot of people went out and bought that album. I think it's one of the highest selling albums ever in Australia, and we kind of lost track of it after, the record company gave us a 7 times platinum award. I think they kind of got bored and didn't give us any more awards after that, but it went well beyond that.
Here we go again. All right. Now, of course, since the 80s, I mean, you've worked with orchestras, ballet, film scores, you've got an ARIA Hall of Fame. Is there one part in that whole career that you can look from a personal achievement perspective that you can go, I've done what I wanted to do?
Look, it would probably wouldn't do a number of moments justice to sort of pick one thing, but I do remember, for example, arriving on the Fox lot in Los Angeles, which is an entire kind of suburb. In fact, the suburb is called Century City, and it's named after 20th Century Fox, which was, this sort of massive machine for making movies, and the project was in 2003 was the score to an incredibly expensive movie called Master and Commander: Far Side of the World. And I remember arriving there with my friend and colleague Simon, and he'd worked there before on lots of big movies, including Moulin Rouge and a bunch of others. And going into this iconic orchestral studio called the Newman Scoring Stage, which is probably the most famous film orchestral studio in the world, and has such a massive history that they won't touch anything in it, in the actual room itself, because Marilyn Monroe sang there and Judy Garland, and it's quite a place. And being there with the sort of absolute A-list Hollywood orchestra, working on this massive big budget movie, and writing the music to it, that was a kind of, stop in your tracks kind of think about it moment, just because of the kind of iconic nature of everything that was around me. So that was pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty
that was
good.
A moment.
Yeah, no, that is brilliant. I actually thought you would mention that. And the other one that I think is from a creative perspective would be the Berlin tapes.
Well, yeah, that was the second ballet, and it was kind of weird the way that evolved, because at that particular point, I'd been writing albums for a long time, and to be honest, writing new material was always very, very difficult for me. And I thought, I'm going to do something easy. I'm going to record a covers album.
Yeah.
And actually, it turned out I had a few goes at recording some of my favourite songs of other people's, and it kind of was incredibly frustrating, because I kept kind of remaking versions of the originals. It was kind of, I got to the end of it and go, well, this is absolutely pointless. I've just recreated exactly almost the original, which is always going to be better than what I can do anyway. And at some point I had a kind of bizarre idea, which was to kind of reduce what the instrumental mix of what I was doing to something that resembled a kind of an ensemble from the 1800s that might be playing in somebody's salon. Before television sets, of course, people used to have little concerts at their houses if they had enough money and had a piano there and so on. And so I reduced the kind of instrumentation that I was using down to this little acoustic ensemble, a piano and a cello and a jazz drummer playing brushes on a drum kit, maybe a couple of violins, whatever. And then I started trying to do versions of these songs with that unit. And it turned into something remarkable. It was so remarkable, in fact, that I could even do, songs by Killing Joke and Public Image, Johnny Rotten song.
Wow.
And it still worked. And so it was bizarre. And I was working closely with a fellow called Max Lambert, who was an amazing pianist. And both he and I had a relationship with Graham Murphy and the Sydney Dance Company. And I looked at Max one day and I said, I can hear this, I can see this as part of a ballet score. I can see us actually kind of hidden on the stage somewhere performing this as the dance company performs as well. And we took the songs to Graham Murphy, and out of that came the ballet Berlin, which was definitely a highlight. And at that album, sort of by that weird kind of accidental process, produced some of the most successful recordings that I've done. I've recorded all that myself, by the way, and so for me that's a bit of an achievement.
And of course, talking about doing covers, now you've just released a song from one of the most iconic bands of all time, T-Rex, and you've done it with Simple Minds. Well, we had, yes, so we started off as a covers band, of course, and that's not unusual. That's sort of the way a lot of young musicians evolve. And we did a very large number of T-Rex songs, but in fact, going right back to the very beginnings at Tyrannosaurus Rex, when it was just Mark Bolan
and his acoustic guitar and a conga player before they became an electric band. And we did a whole lot of those songs as well. So we've got a long history with Mark Bolan's repertoire, and discovered also that Jim Kerr from Simple Minds was a massive fan. And in fact, in a joint interview that we did, he said the very first album that he bought was an album by T-Rex called Electric Warrior.
Yeah.
And so out of that discussion came the idea to do this version of Get It On as a joint recording, yes. Which I found incredibly exciting because, you know, to hear a bit of Simple Minds and their backing vocalists and us and, you know, our sax player and, you know, it's a great sort of combination, really.
Yeah, when it was first released, it was just like I just said to my program manager, I don't care, we're playing this song. Like, you know, we've got to play it. It was that good.
Yeah, it's great fun. And, you know, it's been one of those songs that's sort of been in and out of our repertoire for 40 years or more. So that's how far it goes back.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you're obviously touring with Simple Minds in the next month, and it is a bit of a, I guess, a reunion because you did do it 40 years ago.
Exactly right. So we did, as I say, Jim describes it as a kind of student exchange program, and this would have been 1980, our very first international tour. They were just breaking through in Europe, and so we supported them over there, and then they were completely unknown in Australia, so they supported us here. And, you know, it was pretty funny. You know, I can remember, I've got this picture in my head of we stayed in a lot of very cheap hotel motels, the sort of one you pull your car up to outside and whatever. One particular one in Brisbane that we were staying at had a swimming pool. And I've got this image in my mind of these incredibly pale Scottish boys, you know, thinking that they'd arrived in paradise because the sun was out, it was hot, and there was a swimming pool. And the swimming pool was probably incredibly cold. So I don't know whether they actually got in the water or not, but it was a pretty funny memory seeing them outside there.
Look, I think you guys are going to have an equally as good time travelling around Australia again, and of course you're bringing them over during the hottest period of our summer. So you know, good luck with that. They might get in the pool.
Look, but Charlie and Jim grew up in the same street in Glasgow, and Jim told me this story. And after all these years, both of them have actually moved onto an island off the Italian coast.
Right.
And so they both still live in the same street, but in a completely different environment.
Oh, nice. Look, just as a final question, I always ask this, what are you currently listening to at the moment?
Oh, no, that's a pretty unfair question. Look, you know, it's interesting with me. I have, for a long time, considered music to be work. So, yes. You know, at one point, you know, this is fairly early on, I had a girlfriend and she liked to go to sleep with the radio on. And this drove me absolutely insane because I'd be lying there trying to go to sleep and I'd be analysing stuff that's come off the radio and making mental notes for future use in writing songs and stuff like that. So I don't listen to anything, but I have constantly stuff popping into my head. For example, I've just spent the entire morning with Daydream Believer by the Monkees on the Brain. Now, right. I have no idea where that came from, but I'll have these completely bizarre things that pop into my head. And then if it's something that I go, oh, I can only remember a little bit of that, then I'll have to play it. So, for example, I think probably yesterday was Tomorrow Never Knows by the Beatles, and I just wanted to hear it, you know, just to remind me of how brilliant that piece of work is.
Now, I'm just imagining Icehouse and Simple Minds doing Daydream Believer. I think that would be a really good second follow-up from Get It On.
No, I didn't say in any of that conversation that I actually liked the things that popped into my head. I just said they actually pop into my head whether I like it or not. So there you go.
There you go. Look, thank you so much, Iva, for joining me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hope everything goes well for you at Festivali. Looking forward to seeing you perform on stage.
Yeah, always great to get to Tasmania, so looking forward to it very much ourselves. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Iva.
See you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Long Way to the Top. Hit plus or follow to subscribe to the podcast and head over to Facebook at the Long Way to the Top podcast and give us a like. Keep on rocking and I'll catch you on the next episode of Long Way to the Top.